This is Jim Williams with the Hurricane City Tropical Update for October 1st, 12 noon. Here's the HurTrack program showing our closest approach to Bermuda. That'll be at 7 p.m. this evening, and the system will be a Category 3 hurricane with winds of 115 miles an hour while weakening and moving off to the north. It should pass about 112 miles to the east of Bermuda. Now notice the yellow circle up here are gusts to tropical storm force, and it looks like they're going to pass east of the island, so they're not even going to get any hurricane force, tropical storm force winds on the island of Bermuda, although it is possible they could have a gust or two to tropical storm force, but basically this is going to pass well off to the east of the island. Let's take a look at a radar here of our system, and you can see that we have obviously Bermuda right in the center here. We have some bands out in here, some bands off to the, they're coming in from the southeast over the island of Bermuda, but basically these have very little wind associated with them. They're just basically downpours on the outer feeder bands of Hurricane Ophelia, and that's about all they're going to get. Now the winds will get increasingly stronger out of the north as the afternoon wears on and going into this evening, and then as the system pulls away, they'll get very strong winds out of the west-southwest, probably up around 35-40 miles an hour as the system pulls away, but all the bad weather is going to remain well east of Bermuda. Now here's the way the system looked a few hours ago. Notice how symmetric it is. The central dense overcast, the eye right in the center of this, and look at the perfectly almost symmetrical system. This is a 120 mile an hour hurricane. And then if we go to the next image, which is just from a little while ago, the system's getting a little bit ragged, excuse me, ragged, and the feeder bands are beginning to break up a little bit here, and it's not as symmetrical as it was earlier, so we think the system is beginning to weaken now and should be down close to Category 2 strength when it passes near Bermuda this evening. Now if you take all the storms in history that were in the location of Ophelia and use the date from September 30th through October 2nd, a 3-day period, you'll see there's only been 3 named storms, and all of them went out into the open Atlantic. None of them hit the United States. It's very difficult for a system anywhere near Bermuda this time of the year to come across like this or any kind of a pattern like that. You're just not going to get that this late in the hurricane season. Usually if the Northeast or the Mid-Atlantic United States is going to get affected by a named storm, it's going to be from the south this time of the year. But out near Bermuda, you're just simply not going to get that. Now, what about Philippe out here in the East Atlantic? Let's do the same for Philippe, and let's show you all the named storms. 1872 was the only storm that was around this time of the year between September 30th and October 2nd, and that was a system that recurved out into the open Atlantic and did not affect anybody back in 1872. So again, even less of a chance for a system way out here to make it towards the United States. Just simply not going to happen in October. All right, here's another option of the HurTrack program, and this is showing the wind speed and the behavior of Ophelia over the past week to 10 days, and you can see the system was relatively weak over here. We're talking 40, 50, 60 mile per hour winds, and then all of a sudden on the 24th, the system really started to gain strength in here. It got 60, 70, and it just steer-stepped every day. It got a little bit stronger, and now it's pretty much leveled off the past few advisories here about the last 24 hours. We've had sustained winds right around 120 miles an hour, and that should start to scale down now as this moves up into the North Atlantic. But pretty cool 3D graphic from the HurTrack program. All right, here is the water vapor image of the Atlantic Basin, and you can see we have a very strong trough coming off the United States, and that's going to take Ophelia and slingshot this north and then eventually northeast. And we also have Philippe out here, but notice this big old upper level low here to the southwest of Philippe, and that is causing some wind shear here out of the northeast. And the center of Philippe is somewhere in here. It's been a pretty ragged system the entire time, but basically Philippe is going to move off to the west-southwest for the next few days. It's going to get kind of interesting here when this gets north of Puerto Rico, but most of the models now are taking this north in the middle of the week here and starting to go east of Bermuda. But the GFS, interestingly enough, wants to keep this system kind of lingering down here. It builds another ridge of high pressure up in here and stops this from hooking out into the open Atlantic. So we might be tracking Philippe for quite a while here. We're going to be, once Ophelia gets out of the way and gets near Newfoundland and get out into the open Atlantic, we're going to start changing the maps over to Philippe, and we're going to follow Philippe closely. Now, they're indicating it's going to remain a tropical storm. Earlier, they were indicating it would weaken to a remnant low. Now it's going to remain as a tropical storm all through its journey, so we'll be able to have something at least track rather than a remnant low. So it'll be interesting to watch that. Now, while I have this map up, the future here, going into the second week of October, there's some indications that we're going to see some pressure drops down here in the western Caribbean Sea, and the NOGAPS and the Canadian model indicating we're going to see a low pressure area develop down here, maybe move into Central America, but the long-range models, the GFS, are indicating second week of October we could see a significant system develop down here in the western Caribbean Sea and start moving north. So this is something we're going to have to watch for. Late in this hurricane season, especially October, that's prime time for Western Caribbean development, and systems can come across Florida, go up the East Coast, or they can come up into the northern Gulf Coast, or they can cut across Florida and head out into the open Atlantic, or they can simply go northeast right over the Bahamas and eastern Cuba. Those are the most likely areas to be affected in October. And that's not to say that Texas and areas like that can't get affected, but usually a line like this, anything past this line in October is almost virtually impossible. And also, when you get to Puerto Rico and the Lesser Antilles, it's less likely in October that you're going to have something affected. But all these other, and from this line north, it's unlikely. Getting late into second week of October or later, it's really impossible pretty much to get a system up that way. But this whole area down in here is where we need to watch going into October and November. All right, here's the inventory of our current season. And we had quite a few major hurricanes out in the East Pacific that went harmlessly out into the open Pacific. But look at the Atlantic. A lot of recurvatures this year. I mean, there's just been a ton of them out here. Bermuda's been brushed a bunch of times, but they really haven't been directly impacted except for a couple tropical storms. And the big storm so far this year remains Hurricane Irene. Went up the eastern seaboard after hitting the Bahamas as a major hurricane. But again, there's going to be a lot of speculation on this. Was this a hurricane when it hit the Northeast? And that's still going to be debatable and may be debated for years, because we did not have any reports of sustained hurricane force winds on the eastern seaboard. So if this ends up being the biggest story so far this hurricane season, it'll be a good hurricane season for people that don't want to have to deal with hurricane impacts on land. The hardest hit area will end up having been the central Bahamas down here that got really pounded by Irene as a major hurricane, and a couple of those islands were in my top 5 this year. I'll get more into that as we get later in the hurricane season. But this is an interesting track. This was on October 12th. I know I'm kind of contradicting myself here, but I did mention the Western Caribbean for activity. This is going back to 1894, and we had a hurricane come all the way up the eastern seaboard and affect Long Island, and that was on October 11th, 1894. So it can happen in the middle of October, but it would have to come from the southwest right up the eastern seaboard and affect the northeast. But you're definitely not going to get any coming like this in October. It's just highly unheard of. So we're winding it down here, and we're going to focus our main areas down here in the western Caribbean Sea. All right, let's take a look one more time at the AVN shot. There it is. That's our latest image of Hurricane Ophelia. We're going to watch Philippe too, but it looks like that's going to also turn into the North Atlantic. That's it for now. I'll be back with another update in several days from now. We'll keep track of what's happening, and by then, maybe Philippe and Ophelia should be off the map, and then we'll be focusing down toward the Western Caribbean Sea. That's it for now. Thank you again for visiting Hurricane City.